I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, March 3rd for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Barron?
Here.
Ms. Bradley? Ms. Caldwell Johnson? Here. Mr. Cody?
Here.
Ms. Delagardelle?
Here.
Ms. Sawyer?
Here.
The first item of business is approval of our agenda. May I please have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion by Sawyer and a second by Barron.
Bradley.
Bradley.
Oh, did
There was a chorus, so
Oh,
I
was there?
picked.
You
I
pick
picked
either one.
I picked one. Next time I'll pick you. All right, please vote. Motion passes 7-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of our minutes for Tuesday, February 18th, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval. Second.
We have a motion by Caldwell Johnson and a second by Anderson. Please vote. The vote is approved 7-0. Dr. Ahart, do we have any district recognitions this evening?
We do not this
No, all right. The next item on our agenda is the consent items. We allow any person or persons the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please go to the information desk to sign up. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Bradley, I believe you have the consent motion.
Yes, I do. I move the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $8,975,087.82, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $350,970.72.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Bradley and a second by Caldwell Johnson. Any discussion or questions?
I did have just a real brief question. I'm not going to do it this evening, but I wanted to just better understand sort of the phase strategy around the pottery studio. So I'll just send an email to Dr. Ahart just so I can get additional information on that. But I was involved in a couple of other conversations around additional funding for the project, and I never really quite understood sort of the phase strategy based on the level of funding that was received. So thanks.
Any other discussions or questions? Please vote. The consent items are approved 7-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D1, public hearing for the sale of property at Pleasant Hill Elementary? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Superintendent Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board approve the sale of property at Pleasant Hill Elementary School to the city of Pleasant Hill for the purchase price of $1.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and the superintendent's recommendation?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion by Caldwell Johnson and a second by Anderson. Any questions or discussion? All right, please vote. The vote is approved 7-0. The next item on our agenda is item E1, our monitoring report on Algebra 1, Part 2, Black male students. I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, board. This is our second report on our Black Male SMART goal for algebra. And with me here this evening are two familiar faces, Noelle Nelson and Sarah Doherty. You'll note on evaluation that is left blank. We will be starting to use the new template in the third round of monitoring reports. So this will just be a vote for acceptance tonight. And with that, I will turn things over to Sarah.
Thank you. Good evening. We'll get started. So as a reminder, our board goal number 3 is the percent of Black male students earning a B or higher in Algebra 1 by the end of 9th grade. And that will increase from 17% to 35% by August 2023. When I was with you last time for part 1 of this report, we talked a little bit about why Algebra 1 and thinking including but beyond Algebra 1 as a gateway course to college, but also career readiness and thinking about Algebra 1 that way. And we also talked about what a positive math identity can do beyond the math classroom for our Black male students. And when I talked last time about that, I talked a little bit about equipping those students, and all students really, for improved outcomes for themselves, their communities, and society at large. And tonight I'm going to expand upon that a little bit and ask that we start thinking about Algebra 1 as a way to equip students to not just navigate systems, but also respond to and advocate within those systems to be changed for themselves, for the better. So that's kind of like moving from an equity stance to an anti-racist stance around math. And I know we're just talking about Algebra 1, but we're talking about a lot more than Algebra 1, not just for our students and our system. So it's larger than math, but it's math. So let's talk about it. Our goal benchmarks are these, and I just wanted to put those up as a reminder of the trajectory we're looking at taking to reach that goal by 2023, and a reminder that our current 6th graders will be those 9th graders in 2023. It will load. This is the live, we're trying something new tonight. This is a live slide. And I brought that up tonight because it's important to note as we go through this data, it's all here, but that if you hover over with the tooltip, you can get expanded data about that individual data point, the raw numbers, and some comparisons. So I wanted to cue you into that. It's really handy, and we've included it in a live slide tonight, but I have pulled those data pieces out and put them in the subsequent slides. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Thanks, Tim. We're magical at making that happen. Our first progress measure really looks at the access portion of this goal, and it's the percent of Black male students scheduled in Algebra 1 at the beginning of their 9th grade year, or entering 9th grade with a B or higher in Algebra 1. Our benchmark goal for enrollment was 71.2% of our Black male students enrolled. And you can see that's putting us on a trajectory of having 80% of those students by 2023 enrolled. Our actual percentage in semester 2 was 65.2%. And I've also included in these slides the range, and that's the range amongst the schools. I wanted to be clear that we're giving you the overall percentage, but also that means we have a school with 60% of their Black male students enrolled and a school with 75.7%, and our high schools fall within that range. And I also, because these progress measures are really specific, wanted to call out what question each of them answers for us. And this one speaks to, from a student perspective, I'm in Algebra 1 right now, or I took it in 8th grade and earned a B or higher. Our second progress measure is focused on grades. Those are the two aspects of this goal, access and grades. And this progress measure is the percent of Black males enrolled in Algebra 1 as 9th graders who are earning a B or higher. So these are students that are in the course right now. And from the student perspective, I'm in Algebra 1 right now, and I earned a B or better in first semester. Our benchmark goal was 18.5%, and we exceeded that one for students who are in the class, with 19.7% of our Black male students earning a B or higher in semester 1. And you can see the range represented there as well. Our additional progress measures are college and career readiness as measured by MAP. For 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we do not have 9th grade winter data because they don't take the MAP in 9th grade. For our 6th grade students, our benchmark goal was 7.9%. And for winter, it was 5% of our Black male students college and career ready. And you can see the range there, and that's amongst 10 schools. For seventh graders, we were also short of our goal of 10.3%. 4.9% of our Black male students are college and career ready as measured by MAP, with the range there of 0% to 14.3% across our 10 middle schools. And for eighth grade, our benchmark goal was 8.6%. 6.5% scored college and career ready on MAP this winter, and our range was 0 to 18.2%. I'm going to revisit our levers and root causes, both lifted up by our community problem-solving process, but confirmed by both national and a growing body of internal local data that lifted up expectations, purpose, and self-efficacy, both for students and teachers, and student-teacher connections as root causes for our current standing in student outcomes in Algebra 1. Those, as they currently stand, are still being verified. We have a partnership with Iowa State University that's really focusing on Black male performance in Algebra 1, and through student surveys, student interviews, and teacher interviews and surveys, they're actually getting to some of these questions with kids about how they feel and how they would describe their experience in Algebra 1, but we're waiting on that data from them to verify these root causes. Anecdotally, I think we can point to they'll likely be verified and addressed, but I just want to be clear that those are under a verification process right now. But these three levers and root causes have been verified, and where we're putting the majority of our effort right now in designing and executing a plan. Those are resources and training for teachers, access to the course itself, and access starts in kindergarten and pre-K really, and curriculum and instruction. You'll recognize these levers from the early literacy report, but these are the 4 levers with equity as a through line that have been commonly lifted up amongst all community problem-solving groups, and our overarching kind of universal levers to address these systemic root causes leading to outcomes in math, literacy, and we know the work that needs to be happening in SEL. So I want to talk a little bit about our response to access. Our goal in access is not just to continue increasing the numbers of students in Algebra 1 without thoughtful consideration. Our goal is actually to increase our confidence in students being placed in the appropriate course. And that means, over time, increasingly Algebra 1. We know that actually putting students into courses they are not yet ready for increases their chance of dropping out or not attending that class. So we want them to be ready, but we also want for more students for that class to be Algebra 1. We have a really concrete example of one of the ways we're increasing access. We worked with the Welcome Center and the ELL department to create a screener that newcomer students, English language learners coming into the district would take right there at the Welcome Center, and then they would be placed based on their math ability, just on that screener, not just their language level. And we've had some success in placing students who previously might have been placed just based on their language level in an off-grade level math course, who are now being placed in an on-grade level math course because we have data and evidence from that student, from those students that show us that they're ready for Algebra 1. So that's just a concrete example of the kind of systems overhaul that we really have to look at, and some of the detail work that's going to take to reach both the access part of our goal and the academic performance part of our goal. But all through that is strengthening algebra readiness, and that's not just improving our algebra classrooms and supporting teachers in that, but that's really a pre-K through 9th grade and then beyond look at access. In terms of curriculum and instruction, we have been piloting illustrative mathematics curriculum in a number of our middle schools. And next year, 100% of 6th through 8th grade math classrooms, Algebra 1 classrooms, Algebra 2 classrooms, and geometry classrooms will implement the illustrative math curriculum with integrity, starting in the 2021 school year. Illustrative math is aligned to the shifts in the core, which really speak to the demands of the way the Common Core standards are written. There are embedded math language routines, which help students speak to their conceptual learning rather than just demonstrate their procedural learning, and it helps students who are developing language, whether it's English as their first or second language, to speak to their math learning. The learning is focused on the content standards and math practice standards, and it values inputs and builds that positive math identity, which we spoke to as one of our even purposes for looking at Algebra 1. Learning has been underway to prepare teachers for that with some foundational pieces about that conceptual or that philosophical shift in math instruction and learning. But we're also planning summer professional development with illustrative math for teachers to unpack that curriculum, to understand it, not just to understand the what, the pieces and the parts, but the design principles, the why, the purpose behind it. And that learning isn't just for teachers, but we also have planned learning for leaders and coaches. It won't be just those event professional developments that teachers will need in order to get familiar, comfortable, and effective with the curriculum, but we need to build ongoing in-building supports who can support continually for our teachers, and that means making sure that our leaders and coaches are up to speed on the curriculum. And there are lots of opportunities for integrating both SEL and equity right within the curriculum. It's not necessarily inherent, and so that's something that we're doing internally with the teams and resources we have to bring those things to the surface and then prepare teachers to see the connections and then leverage those connections in the classroom for better math outcomes, but also for better SEL and equity outcomes for our students. A little bit more about the design of IM. I've heard, and I think you asked me before, and I know you've asked about other reports about what makes this different. Why is this a different choice? You can see the top is kind of a map of what traditional math instruction like. I would guess that many of you experienced math instruction that looked like this, that starts with some kind of warm-up. The teacher presents what the concept is today, maybe fractions. I show you how to multiply fractions, and then you practice by doing questions 4 through 40 in the book, and if you get all of those done, maybe do 10 more, right? And then maybe look in the back for the answers. That's maybe how I experienced math. Illustrative math asks both teachers and students to approach that slightly differently, actually maybe fundamentally differently through problem-based instruction. It starts with a warm-up with an invitation to the math, which may mean front-loading some skills or addressing potentially unfinished learning from previous lessons, both within grade or before. A problem is presented, and students work collaboratively toward the solution, not always having all of the pieces. And at the resolution of the lesson, the concept is synthesized. So you're building things like numeracy and fluency through the solving of a problem. But that's a shift for students, and it's a shift for teachers that we're gonna have to support deeply. The specific shifts in the core that we speak to that this curriculum addresses are the shifts that the design of Common Core standards demand for them to be effective for kids. Focus, the curriculum focuses strongly where the standards focus. There are a lot of math standards to cover, and frankly, they're not of all equal importance. There is a set of standards that are the major work of the grade level. The curriculum allows us to focus on the major work of the grade level, but also address the additional and supporting standards through the learning of the major work. It also addresses coherence, which helps us think across grade levels and link to major topics within grades. Math learning, as we've kind of traditionally thought of it, has been thought of as linear, but it's kind of more of a web. And so the coherence that's developed in the curriculum addresses the complex nature of math learning, not just as a linear building of skills. And then rigor, as it applies to math, is the pursuit of conceptual understanding, procedural skill, and fluency in application with equal intensity. And so the benefit and what's different about having a curriculum that so tightly aligns to the shifts is that it allows teachers to really focus on the art of instruction, which is developing that relevance and relationships with their students so that they can think about how those materials best fit with the confidence that it's addressing Common Core standards through the shifts. And it also gives them some autonomy and thinking about how math language routines fit in. What would be the best way for kids to express this learning? What do I know about my students that helps me design the way they produce evidence? And so it's a different way of approaching math, but we know that difference has to be deeply supported, and that's what both the curriculum and the plan for implementation and support represents. And with that, we'll open up for some questions.
Before we open it up for discussion, I will take a motion and a second to accept item E1, our Algebra 1 Part 2 black male students. We have a motion by Barron and a second by Cody. Is there any discussion, or what questions do we have tonight, board? Go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
Let's see. What was used before, previously?
We've had kind of a hodgepodge. Go Math for elementary. And I have Courtney, our curriculum coordinator, is here. I'm going to ask her to help answer that question. Thanks.
For middle school, we've been using Glencoe consumable textbooks. I would say probably about half the middle schools were using them in the past couple of years.
Okay.
Others were kind of hodgepodging some things together. And in high school, the adopted curriculum that we have is CME.
Okay.
Again, most schools were kind of using our topic scales and then just building their own tasks on their own.
And is the only one that's going to change, is this just for high school then?
No, 6th through 8th grade will also.
Oh, 6th through 8th, okay.
We have piloting classrooms in middle schools this year.
Okay, and so it's still Go Math for elementary, though?
For now.
Okay.
Thanks, Courtney.
Ms. Sawyer?
Please bear with me, I do have my questions written out here. And I know that there's going to be a different format for this report, so I'll be excited to see that new format because it's a little confusing going back and forth. It'd be nice to have graphs all within progress measures, to have it just right there and readily available. The one thing I would say is I would almost say we're non-compliant in this section because there are many things, benchmarks we didn't meet and things that fell. So I just point that out. But when I look at, I'm trying to think of where to even start. So progress measure 1, and so one of the things that I noticed is from the first semester to second semester, there was a drop from 71.2% to 65.2%. What was that attributed to?
Sure. So we had the drop was attributed to students who were moved from who were enrolled in Algebra 1 on the first day of the first semester. We had 8 who were moved into a special education course, or the 2-year Algebra 1 course that spans over 2 years, or a foundational algebra course. We had 2 students moved into an ELL math course, and 3 students who were moved into an academic support lab. And then we had a couple of students who were being moved out of those classrooms who were being served either by district-wide programs in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. And because I know in the first report that we got, or at least I think it was in the presentation section, it did break down ELL, special education, free reduced lunch. We didn't get any of that in any kind of report out, and so that may be helpful to see if there are you seeing any trends with, are there students that are struggling more than others? And I don't know if you could identify that for me today. I mean, obviously there are some that moved into special education or ELL classrooms or did receive academic support, but anything else that you're seeing with the data?
Well, this progress measure is focused on Black males, so to look across other,
Right.
yeah, we can provide that
Black
for you.
males within, right. If you look at progress measure 2, which is the percent of black males enrolled in algebra as ninth graders who are earning a B or higher. Sorry, never mind. I was lost in that question. That's not where I was going. But looking at the progress measure 3 with all the sections of the map, that's the map scores, and where we're non-compliant. You know, what can you say about that data? Can you anticipate when we will become compliant? What will it take to get there?
Yeah, I do think that one of our key levers that it will take is that common curriculum that address the shifts in the core. As Courtney spoke to right now, teachers are sort of putting all of those things together on their own to address those shifts, to make sure that it's focused on the major grade level of the standard, to make sure it has a balance of conceptual, procedural, and application work, and making sure it's coherent, addressing prior learning and getting them ready for what's next. And to do that from a bare minimum resource level, or even the resources that we've provided, is a tall order to do that, and also like develop relationships and to effectively PLC. I'm confident that if we have a highly aligned curriculum and we support teachers deeply in using it, we'll see a movement on those numbers. The other thing I think about MAP is it asks students to take their conceptual understanding about math and apply it in a new context. And procedural learning, which we're heavy in right now alone, is not going to allow kids to take that, internalize it, and then use those skills in the ways that MAP asks them to. And so by restoring that balance, we can address exactly what MAP is. And actually, college and career readiness is not just about the assessment, it's about getting them ready for what the assessment represents, can do that. I'm only confident we can do that by giving teachers the high quality materials and helping all teachers implement those with integrity across the board. That plus addressing those other levers, because it's not just about the curriculum, right? It's about how kids feel about their math class. It's about changing both their perception and their teacher's perception too. So it's a tall order. But I do think that there's kind of that technical piece around the curriculum and the adaptive piece around the philosophy and the why around it, and the efficacy of our teachers and our students that's really going to make those things move forward. We really have put a lot of our efforts into Algebra 1, knowing that we need to continue to move down the line to prepare them to move up.
And so you talked about implementation of the IM curriculum. Do you anticipate any kind of math curriculum changes to the K through 5, that elementary age?
That's under review right now, so we are anticipating that. We want to move faster than we're ready to move. So because we're undergoing a pretty significant literacy adoption right now, and because teachers in elementary teach it all, we're trying to be cognizant of that and be aware of that. So our plans for next year is we do have a field study happening on a volunteer basis. So we have some schools opting in who do believe that they've got some command of the literacy work that's happening, and they're ready to take on this new layer. So we'll be studying the impact of that and then making some decisions on what we want to bring to scale.
Okay. Superintendent Ahart, a quick question for you. What would your evaluation of this performance measure be if you were to say how we're doing in this? Just curious if you have thoughts on it.
Well, clearly there's a lot of work to do. We're developing that new evaluation scale. If this were compliant and non-compliant, I would say non-compliant. However, when I look at, I am proud of the work that we've done in addressing this, given that we really didn't have an avenue to put budget behind it, because the goal wasn't defined until well past when we had to certify the budget. So I think we've I think we've involved the community very well in trying to identify root cause. That's still, as Sarah mentioned, still underway, getting verified with Iowa State. We have found resources to move forward with IM, and as Noelle said, we're investigating what's the best move for elementary, so that our students are moving into middle school more prepared for algebra readiness. So I'm proud of the work we're doing. This doesn't surprise me. The other thing that I would say is this is data that we've never looked at before, on a consistent basis, because we didn't have a goal tied to it. So,
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Mr. Cody?
Yeah, I've got a few. So I'd like to start with the map test itself. When I was giving the map, it was just something that we did, and it wasn't taken very seriously. So I'm wondering, what is the messaging behind that? I mean, this number is very important to us. I mean, this is something that we're going to be talking about for a long time. But how is it being told to the teachers and therefore to the students about why this is important?
Yeah, one of the advantages to having the focus of a board goal is it does give purposes for how we measure that goal some deeper meaning. And beyond just meeting a goal, but even the way I started talking about the goal tonight, about its algebra's importance beyond just getting ready for the next stage, it allows us to focus and give some language to that. And so one of the things we're doing ourselves, but also asking schools to embrace, is when we have this focus around a board goal, how do we look at that data? And the community problem solving goes back and forth, right? So that also means as the community gives us input about how we reach the goal and how we're working on the goal, we also provide them feedback at the school level and then and to our parents. So it gives us kind of a community sense of language about what those assessments mean and why they're important beyond just being the assessment itself. It gives it some purpose and some weight. And I think that's language we're building not only through the problem-solving process, but as we implement a curriculum about the purpose of math and why we want to continue to measure it. Because I think without those things, all assessments can kind of just be the assessment, but it weights it in some purpose greater than just the outcome of the map, measuring how kids are growing.
The other thing, and I know we referenced this a little bit in the early literacy report, is by the board creating this comprehensive monitoring system, that will cascade down and is cascading down to our schools. Because it's not to say we haven't monitored, we just haven't done it in a really targeted way that clearly communicates what's important. So we've tried to monitor everything. So all data was important a year ago. So now this is really honing in on this is the data we're paying attention to, this is how we're measuring our goals, and that then starts to translate to school-based monitoring, which then will translate to teacher-based monitoring, which will then translate to student-based monitoring. So it's building that cascade over the course of the year.
Okay, my next question then is about the curriculum implementation. Teachers and especially math teachers are very territorial and they don't want to give up what they've been doing.
Yeah.
I know we technically had full implementation of the last curriculum, but I mean, you were just telling us that didn't really work. Are the teachers seeing these numbers or other numbers that would indicate what they're doing really isn't working? I mean, how are we going to goose these guys into using the new stuff?
Mm-hmm. One interesting thing that we just started is, and this is just kind of a technical thing, but it starts to get to that point of we don't ever want to assume that all teachers at the classroom level are even aware of where we stand with the data. They might be aware of where their individual class stands, but maybe haven't had, if the school isn't engaging in that comprehensive look, then that's a problem. So we are kind of taking it upon ourselves to issue out large-scale email blasts to each school that will get to every single staff member in Des Moines to say, here's where we are in progress toward our goals. So also, it is not just the problem, I say problem or opportunity, of the math teachers in the school. I think we're seeing in our high schools in particular that algebra ownership of success in algebra is everyone's responsibility. And so then as more people become aware of where we stand in relation to these goals, and we can blast that out every time we come to you, our staff is also getting that same information. We can start to engage in those conversations about where are we falling short, where do we need to double down? And frankly, with our literacy, it was a really great opportunity to celebrate. We don't do that nearly enough either. So we are starting to put those systems in place that we have kind of this wide-scale effort and rallying around student information and student data.
And when that information is clear to teachers, and then we can couple it with, and
here's how we support you.
Here's how we support you, and here are some high-quality materials. Not that just you need to know the what about, but that speaks to the how and the why. Most of our folks became math teachers to begin with. It's something that we haven't had in tandem. And when they are together, I think we're noticing some powerful conversations and people willing to do something different when both of those things are presented to them as part and parcel of one support.
Okay, so this is a two-parter. a lot of these slides showed a range of, 0 to 18 or 0 to whatever. I guess part one is regarding the top of those ranges. Is there any correlation that the pilot sites are the ones that are reaching that?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I'm not quite yet comfortable in drawing a correlation between stronger outcomes to those classes that are piloting yet. One, because our next step would be to do some integrity or fidelity studies of implementation to understand the depth of that implementation. I think once we have that, and also once we have a little larger sample size, so we can say both how many classrooms are using it and to what depth or to what level of integrity is it being used, we can start to draw some conclusions. I'd like to be able to start to speak to that probably about this time next year.
Sure. And then on the flip side, the zeros on those ranges, I'd imagine that's probably the same school or two coming up. Are they getting extra supports at this point, or what's going on there?
They're surprisingly, they're not the same school. I think one of our biggest challenges is intergrade or interclassroom variability in singular schools. And so that is a challenge that we're working on schools addressing, looking with data literacy and really focusing in the same way we focused in on board goals with this topic, now focusing in kind of Noelle's point about PLCs and classrooms. And so one of the opportunities there is to get to those places and not just an entire system, but work with a leadership team or a school to really hone in on a PLC and devise some really focused supports. And in that way, it feels very doable and manageable because we're looking at student level data and classroom level data. And so it is about addressing that inner variability amongst classrooms or PLCs in singular schools.
Yeah, and I guess just to double down on that, a surprising trend that we're seeing across the district in all of our data is, to Sarah's point, we actually have more variance within a single school across classrooms than we have across schools. So that tells us we need much tighter systems. With tighter systems also comes some resistance. And so I guess that's something for the board to anticipate. But I think our results are telling us that we can no longer afford to have extreme levels of autonomy, even autonomy within a school across classrooms, because that is an equity issue. And we have to view it as such, not to view it as we're just trying to control every aspect of what happens in a classroom. This is an equity issue.
I just have one more. There was a slide that said board goal 3 and then at August 18, June 19. So from 19 to 20, it went from 24 to 21, and then for 21, it's to 25. Are those blue numbers kind of a recalibration, or was that always going to be a 25 there for 21?
Yeah, so the goal was set in August with that 17%. We didn't yet have summer school data in, and that summer school data put us in June at 24%. So rather than adjust the trajectory or the benchmarks, we kept them the same based on that August 2018 data.
With the same endpoint then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's it for me.
Mr. Barron.
This isn't a question, but just an observation. As you're continuing to prepare these reports and refine them, I took note of the measure details that went into each goal measure and progress measure, and I really appreciated that. I thought that was actually a good place to start reviewing the data. So and that hadn't been in prior ones, and I wanted you to know that at least I found that valuable.
Good, thanks. Thanks to Mary, our data and assessment team also supported us in kind of refining that.
The goal is much more complex than it appears at face value.
Absolutely.
Ms. Bradley or Ms. Caldwell-Johnson, do you have any?
I do have a couple of questions. I think we've already talked about, math is a subject that's really sort of a series of building blocks. And I'm going back to, I think it was your question around the K-5 implementation. So I feel like, especially for fifth and sixth graders are going to be moving into middle school. This shift to, make sure I say it right, IM, illustrative math, could be like crazy. And I worry that their ability to be prepared and be ready so that the rigor that is going to be thrust upon them,
Yeah.
I just worry about that. And so I'm wondering how quickly we can advance the K-5 work so that we're not losing a group of kids
Right.
who are fifth, sixth graders that are really going to struggle. And that's really especially for males of color who we know are already challenged, going to put them even further behind, which is really going to impact our ability to have the kind of progress we hope for that subgroup.
I really thank you for lifting that up because I think one of our key strategies, not just in elementary, but also in middle and high school, is to understand how both the adult and student SEL portions might play in this as students address that productive struggle, and how we embed those skills in with the learning of the curriculum about what does productive struggle look like? How do I help transition a student, or even myself as a teacher, from something that was super procedural, something I could do very quickly, to now having to work with another person to solve a problem. And so one of the strategies is to not keep those same things separate for both kids and teachers. Those are authentic opportunities for kids to learn self-awareness and self-regulation, but to our own awareness that we have to equip teachers to do that right alongside the curriculum. Another thing I might point to is our progress measure around grades. While it isn't a wild increase, these ninth graders, this, for the majority of them, is the first time they've also approached a learning like that, and they're, have a 9-year history of maybe learning in a more traditional way. And it's a real, I think it's a win for both our teachers and our students that they were actually able to make some progress in that goal, and that tells me that they're approaching that learning with sort of the same thinking and nuance that you're bringing to it as well.
Yeah, I just worry about that.
Yeah.
We do too, and it's just this constant balance between keeping the press but not tipping everyone over so that the system implodes. And it's not to say just because we're not talking about a formal curriculum adoption yet in elementary. And I want to be clear, we have not made the decision that IM will be the elementary choice. It's something we're looking at, but that hasn't been determined yet. We need to go through that process. But we are doing things to support leadership development in addressing the shifts in the core, looking at access. We've made some really tangible gains this year on making sure that every single ELL student, every single special ed student is getting access to grade level standards. So there are things underway that are happening that are positioning us. It's not that we're standing still and not doing anything to address math while we wait for a new adoption. So we've identified other actions certainly that are underway.
The other thing for our students transitioning into middle school and who are currently in middle school that will experience this curriculum is that one of the things that makes this such a high quality curriculum is that it's embedded with scaffolds to address unfinished learning for kids. And that's not something that's left up to the teachers to totally design themselves. What we have to do is help teachers identify it and then apply those strategies. And they don't have to build that from scratch based on the curriculum. And so that gives me some comfort that we'll be able to, again, put the numbers in front of teachers, put the student needs, and finally provide them with something that can help them address them.
So is there any impact on how we're using SRG and the transition into this new math curriculum as well? And can you just speak to that? I don't need to know all the gory details, but I just want to
How much time you
sort
have?
of generally understand,
And they're
you know,
gory.
how.
Yes, indeed they are.
I think our focus on standards reference grading has hyper-focused us on the standards themselves. So it's forced us to really learn and unpack those standards. So what this is essentially doing is this next layer is giving them a set of instructional materials that aid them in how do we actually approach and teach those standards. And so we've done this deep study of standards, and a majority of our teachers know their standards very, very well. But if I don't understand how my instruction needs to change to ensure every single student meets that standard, then we're coming up short. So this is just kind of, we see it as the next layer. And had we done those things simultaneously, it may have broken the system. So I'm grateful that it worked out just as we planned it, that we tackled the standards first, and now we're adding materials that actually bring those standards to life.
Good. And I just have one question and then one request. So you talked about sort of the shifts that are going to be required for the teachers to really be able to manage this, but you also talked about supporting deeply that shift. So can you tell me a little bit about what deep support looks like, and then also how we're going to measure and monitor the transition?
Sure. The deep support, first of all, is again in the materials themselves reflecting those shifts so that teachers don't have to build them from the ground up. It's also not just then relying on the materials to make those shifts happen, and we have started this year with providing teachers learning about the shifts themselves and how they apply to the standards and what that might look like. Another area of deep support, and I talked about this a little bit, is that's not just coming from a math curriculum coordinator to support 15 schools and helping them. We need other people in that building to understand shifts in math instruction, and that includes our coaches, who will get some deeper content knowledge so they can both recognize and coach around that and consult around it, but also that our leaders can identify it, many of whom may have an uncomfortable math identity at the very moment, and we want to build their confidence that they can recognize when those shifts are happening and effective for students, create some leadership actions in response either way, and know when they need to call on deeper support from the district. The other part of that, and the board goal has done this very beautifully for us, is allow us to focus our professional development on these things.
And
Throughout the year,
resources.
and resources. And so that is a level when we say deep, and we've maybe been shallower across a lot of things, and this allows us to really make that deep commitment throughout all those members of our team.
So I said I had another question and just a request, but I guess I have a follow-up to that. So when we're going through transitions like this, at different stages as we move through the transition, or after we've been sort of in implementation for a year, are we doing any evaluation, or do we have a feedback loop? What does that look like from, administration to teacher and back and forth?
I can speak to the feedback loop around even just the initial pilot and implementation. We've been getting ongoing feedback from our teachers in what they experience, not only in the use and design, and that looks like both in survey data, but in our ongoing support of them in real time, and from students as well. But I think it's also one of our and I think Kelly talked to us a little bit about it in our early literacy, is both measuring the observable integrity of implementation, so we can be sure, which is something we haven't been able to do, that because we're doing this in a classroom, we can point to this student outcome and the implementation in between, so that we can start to draw those straight lines, and that's an ongoing check. So this data too that we're reporting out to you on a more consistent basis quarterly. I think Noelle talked about the cascade to schools as well, and keeping that focus in and their actions aligned to those data outcomes.
It might be helpful at some point for the board to maybe hear from teachers about how the implementation is going, and just to help us understand what's happening in real time in classrooms. So my request is really very simple. So when we look at other district populations, how does the percentage, and you don't have to tell me this tonight because I'm sure you don't know it off the top of your head. If you did, I'd be shocked. But how does the percentage of black males enrolled in Algebra 1 compare to other populations in the district? I just need to sort of be able to put that number in some sort of context. Mhm. That's all I have.
Okay. Ms. Bradley, do you? Okay, okay. I just have a couple clarification things and then some deeper questions. But our board goal is that we'll have 35% of our students at the end of ninth grade earning a B or higher in Algebra 1 by August 2023. And I think this might just be me. Once again, you have to explain the chart to me. I'm sorry. But on slide 8, I think, it says in semester 2, 50%, our target is 50%, would be enrolled as ninth graders who are earning a B or higher.
Right. So our,
Explain that to me, thank
sure.
you.
So our board goal means all black males
Okay.
by the end of ninth grade. This progress measure is just the students who are enrolled in Algebra 1 right now.
Okay, so so we want to have half of them by the spring of 23 because they represent a smaller portion of everybody, because some of them might take it as 8th graders. Mary's like, let me explain my slide.
So how we broke down the goal, because we have like the two progress metrics, which are basically access and then grades once you get in the course. So that end goal in the spring of 2023 is 35%. So if you get 80% of kids with access, and then 50% of those are earning a B or higher, that gets us to 40%. But we also know that they have to get a B in Algebra 1 or in semester 1 and semester 2. So that 35% is triangulated by the 80% access, and then of those 80% of kids, a little less than half will get B's. See, my math brain is going, oh yeah. But so that's how we broke it down, and I can probably put that in writing to make it a little clearer.
Yeah, and well, and I'm also sure, at some point we'll have you come up and explain this, like, compass with the triangle and like where we get in the middle to get our
Pictures,
goal. But
yeah.
the picture, like, the diagram that we'll actually draw for how we, yeah. Okay, so that's very helpful. But I was like, wait, am I reading this wrong? Did it change or no?
No.
So, okay, great. Remind me of the connection between MAP scores and what we can expect for how students might perform in Algebra 1, because MAP tells us college and career readiness. So what does that score, like if I'm looking at it, because what I'm really looking at is like our 6th graders, right? And we said they're gonna be our 9th graders in 2023. So if 5% of that students that we're targeting, what does that tell us about them as 9th graders? Like, should we be like, is this like a yellow alarm fire, or like where are we at in that process of what that can tell us about how they'll do in Algebra 1?
Mary, I was going to have you, we're working on some correlation studies because we can't really answer that yet. College and career ready is a much higher bar.
Okay.
I can't prove that yet. That's my
your hypothesis?
prediction.
Okay.
But we did, when setting the progress measure, we did look at current 9th graders that were successful in Algebra 1 with a B or higher, and said what % of those pass that college career readiness and MAP down in, I think we could go down to 6th grade because we've only been doing MAP like 4 years.
Okay.
And so we that's how we set that cut point or that percentage for college career readiness. Like if we think, so if this, if they have an 80% success rate, if they meet that college career readiness, or maybe it's the other way around. So we did some math to try to project, like, so, this cohort of kids, they were 45% college career readiness, and then what was their % getting B or higher? So we looked at that to kind of do a cohort analysis to set those targets back at the 6th and 7th grade. and I probably need to get my notes back out to really
No,
explain
no,
that well.
that's okay. It was really just one of those things where I was trying to figure out where,
Is
like,
there a correlation?
is there a correlation? Is it predictive? How can we know, or can we identify if these kids are leaving sixth grade, like we can predict these kids are gonna be fine for Algebra 1.
Right.
Or can we kind of, I mean, you can't cast the crystal ball and say 100% of those kids who do X are gonna get to Y, but like I just didn't know if we were able to draw any conclusions yet.
Yeah, so the cut point was set, so NWEA, that the vendor of the assessment looked at, it was either ACT or SAT scores, I think they did it for both, but to hit the college readiness on the ACT math, like what's the RIT score, the cut point cascading down, and so if you hit that college and career readiness on the ACT, that means you're ready to take college-bearing math courses your freshman year of college and get a C or higher. So that's your college
Without
ready.
additional support.
Correct, without
Without, yeah,
remediation.
no
Without
remedial
remediation.
courses, yep.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. So two questions I think are a little bit more like just sort of I'm gonna call them philosophical, but they're not even really philosophical. When we are talking a lot about trying to balance what curriculum implementation looks like for our literacy at elementary with our math at elementary, what conversations have happened about how we might be creative in the way that we assign elementary teachers their duties or their classes? Does that make sense? Like, have we had conversations about what a teacher's day might look like moving forward at elementary to help support, curriculum experts? Because I think we've had conversations before that many of our elementary teachers, the content, they don't feel as content strong in math as they might in literacy. And how are we, supporting that, and how could things potentially change in the future to support, teachers feeling strong in that?
That's a good question, and we don't yet have our fully defined support plan until we've established we're ready to adopt something, and then what's the corresponding support plan that goes along with that. Are you referring to like creative ways in how we actually assign and use staff differently
A
that
little
might
bit,
look
and
more like secondary?
I'm not advocating or
Sure.
asking for this to happen, but
Right.
I'm just wondering, have we considered things such as having there be literacy, teachers and math teachers at elementary levels where they really get to dig in and focus, and they're the experts, and and have we thought about how that might help our kids get to where we want? Or just what does that, really what I'm asking is, how are we being creative in the way that we
Right.
might use our staff, or have we had those conversations? Or
We
what
have
kind of
not had that
conversations?
conversation yet.
Okay.
I know we've had some historical practices in the district, not necessarily between literacy and math, but like science and social studies, and like kind of specializing and allowing kids to move and versus asking teachers to teach everything. I think the research has shown that doesn't necessarily yield better results.
Okay.
But there's a lot of variables in that. So I would say probably nothing's off the table at this point, but we haven't explored that explicitly yet.
Okay, and I just want to make it clear, I'm not asking for
Sure.
or anything like that, just wondering kind
Yeah.
of what kind of conversation or
I
what
do
does the
think we have to
research
think
say?
outside the box, though, in especially elementary, knowing that they have a lot that they're learning and teaching and supporting.
Well, and I always thought that when I was going through a pre-service class of, when I looked at, I was taking, Shakespeare and literature theory, lit theory, but, they were taking some of the same English classes as me, plus advanced math, plus advanced science and social studies. And so I know that sometimes our elementary teachers, just the depth of knowledge that they need to support the learning that kids have later, that's a big lift.
All the more reason to have a high-quality curriculum.
Exactly. And then I have a question, I think, that I want to take you back to something you said at the very beginning, when you said we want to take our kids beyond content so that they can advocate for themselves using math and to more of an anti-racist framework. And I feel like you kind of glossed over that, and you're like, okay, I'm going to say
Dropped
this
the
in
bomb and
public,
moved
and like,
on.
is this
Yeah.
okay? But I want you
Well,
to
I'm saying
expand on
that in public.
Please do, say it again,
Yeah.
and I want you to expand on it and tell us
Yeah.
what that looks like and how that affects the work that your team's doing.
So math and very much science and all the things surrounding that are languages of power. and languages of power that we have traditionally in all sorts of systems, including public schools, denied access to marginalized students to. And so when we equip students to use math and to speak about their math learning and to solve problems through math, we give them automatic access to places of power that they've been systematically denied access to over time. And that when they have access to those places, they can use that access to change the system. And so that's what I mean when I say that's not an equity issue, that's an anti-racist stance. And we're talking about like ratios. Sure we are. But when kids are equipped to use that, to look at their world and to enter spaces that they've been traditionally shut out of, we give them power to change the system. And that's at the core of what this is. And all of the stuff around it has to be centered to that. When we talk about why the MAP test, right, or why we're going to ask people to use a curriculum that's going to test their mettle as a teacher or ask students to do something different, it's centered on that. It's centered on equipping kids to advocate in a system that was built for them not to succeed in.
Yeah, and then I think we overlay poverty on top of that because, we look all across the country at some of our poorest places, and they're the places where there's the least amount of access. So I am incredibly proud of the work that, the board is entering into and that you're entering into on the behalf of our community. So thank you for that. And then I just want to bring the board back to something that I think Kelly had mentioned, something about changing monitoring reports, and that's not a conversation I remembered the board talking about. So can we have that conversation now just real quick about, because because our old monitoring reports were full of charts and graphs and they were not helpful. I didn't think, right? They were just full of like chart, graph. And I was like, I just felt like I was in data overload. And so I do know that new board members necessarily didn't have that experience. And so I didn't know if that's a conversation that the board at least wants to decide, do we want to have that conversation and slate that as part of our work? Or I'm just trying to take a temperature of where the board is on that.
Well, I don't need to speak for Kelly. She can certainly speak for herself. But my understanding was that being able to just embed the information within the narrative.
Okay.
So that you don't have to go back and forth. So I don't think it's
Between
really
the slides and the report?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's a huge formatting thing. I
Okay.
think it's just a matter of where you have the information in the report for ease of access.
Yes, so I'm not flipping back and forth between an appendix, which actually I would say this data shouldn't be in an appendix. It should actually be the report. Line graphs, I think, are easier for me to read, but that's a personal preference, I will say that. And not only that, but also having information on here about evaluation of what that progress measure even.
I'm gonna stop us there on evaluation because I think we have that in work session because they've been developing a tool that has not been developed or adopted, or like the board hasn't seen that yet. So we really are kind of in this limbo where I don't feel we can expect our superintendent to put an evaluation on it when we don't have an evaluation tool that the board has accepted for that.
Okay.
So that work I think is still in progress. But yes, I think the point of having the data kind of in the narrative, but I also I don't want to see the old monitoring report format. So I think just figuring out what that looks like. Oh, yeah.
So much less undated than we used to be, so I don't think it should be a huge lift.
Because it's 3 sets of goals or 3 sets of things instead of a dartboard, I guess. I don't know. So. Does anyone else have any requests, or Rob, or?
Well, the only thing that I did notice that's morphed a little bit is towards the end of the last cycle of monitoring reports before we adopted the goal progress monitoring, Tom was putting in a reaction or interpretation from, interpretation is the wrong word because there's already an interpretation in there, which isn't what we're looking for. But similar to your answer to Kelly's question earlier, I think a paragraph of, superintendent's reaction, superintendent's
Analysis, maybe?
Analysis, yeah,
Okay.
would be fine. I don't think that we need very much. I don't want you spending a lot of time on that, and I don't think we need to add very much more content to this report or any of these reports. But I think having something that board members can read it. For me, I like to read the interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
It helps me work through the data, which is why I enjoyed the measure details that you all put in. That helped me better understand everything. So,
Okay. So maybe the same similar kind of narrative that we get currently in their report, but if we could embed the data in there so we're not flipping back and forth.
So just take the data dashboard as it is listed right here as a link and actually just display.
Put a screenshot in there
dashboards.
maybe.
Is that what we're talking about?
I don't know. That's a
problem.
personal preference.
Okay.
That's fine.
I think if that will help the board members read it better, I also though, I echo Robin that I don't want Tom or staff spending an exorbitant amount preparing reports for us because we want the majority of your time spent on getting outcomes for kids. So, but yeah, I think if that will help us read that better. Board, are there any additional questions or comments? I just did not want that one to slip by and I wanted us to make sure we knew what we were expecting or what we could expect of our superintendent. Okay, there is a motion and a second for us to accept this monitoring report. Please, as soon as the screen's up, go ahead and vote. Oh, sorry. There we go. All right, motion passes 7-0. We have two information-only items this evening. The first one is our Head Start Policy Committee meeting minutes from January 24th, 2020. And the second is I asked for our board self-evaluation from January to go ahead and be attached here just as a reminder to the board that our next self-evaluation will be coming at our early April board meeting, so you can expect to be receiving that from me in the next couple weeks to have it compiled and prepared for us to discuss and talk about how we are doing on ourselves.
Can I ask a question of that?
Sure.
Are we still, I think at one point we had Lori contracted to look at our board
Yep, I can
meetings and time, documenting time. Are we still doing that or no?
So the answer to that is yes, Erin has been tracking our time, and I'm imagining we'll probably get some sort of an update on that. As far as a contract with Lori, we are still negotiating that based on what I think the board wants. One of the things that they had thrown out was strategic planning for how the board could continue to get better, and I had told Lori, like, I think we need to live in this for a year or so and kind of figure out where we're at and actually get a chance to practice this before we start tackling, like, how do we get better at governance. I think this board has taken leaps and bounds in the last 2 years in the way that we govern, and I didn't feel, and I think Dwana and Tom agreed with me, that the board would necessarily have the appetite to continue to look at our governance processes at that high of an intensity level. So if I'm incorrect in that, you can let me know, but my idea had just been that we would continue to track and continue to live in this system and continue to perfect where we're at.
Okay, and when will we get those reports? Or
I'm
are
sorry, what
they,
reports?
or the reports for that, Erin? I'm just curious.
It'll get sent out when we do the evaluation.
Evaluation, okay.
Yep, so it'll all get sent out at once.
Okay.
so you said you're negotiating right now with next board. Is that what I heard?
Kind of, with Lori. Lori's changed companies, so we're in a conversation with Lori about continued coaching, and when I have something that I feel like Dwana and Tom and I are comfortable with, I will bring it back to the board, but I wasn't ready yet to share any specific proposal with you tonight.
What's the status of our current contract right now?
We're not currently under contract.
How long?
I think it ended in December.
Really?
I thought so. I think it was just for 1 year. We'd asked for a contract, and it's taken a little bit of time to get an initial, and then when we saw it, we weren't completely happy with it and got it back to her, and it took a little bit of time to get it back. So she got it to us, I think it was like mid last week, and we just told her we would let her know later this week after we've got a chance to discuss it. And so when I've got something that I feel like is in a good place, I will bring it back to the board.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this, but can you maybe articulate what it is you're looking for on our behalf or what we're looking for as a board?
Yeah.
So that we can understand sort of,
It seemed like the pieces that we needed were continued support around our board evaluations. We haven't gone through a full year cycle on that. And so there were some additional things that, Lori was wanting to tackle with us that I felt like we needed to continue to do our board evaluations. I don't feel like we're very smooth in that process yet. And so continuing to be supported on that, continuing to be supported on time tracking.
And we still have an adjustment to make to governance policies as it relates to monitoring, so that we have SMART goals clearly delineated from all the other 4 series monitoring that we do.
And we haven't yet accepted an evaluation on our monitoring reports. Like we haven't yet, figured out what that tool is or what that looks like, or have accepted that.
I have a couple of thoughts. I'll talk to you offline.
Yes, no, that would be great. So, all right. Next up, we have items of privilege. Do any board members have any comments to share?
I do have one, and it's really in follow-up to our public forum this evening. I'm wondering if we might be able to get a little bit more information on pathways for students who are currently enrolled in the Chinese program, especially those that are so close to sort of being finished.
Yep.
And better understanding sort of how we manage the transition or support the transition for those students. I realize that there are lots of things that we either can or can't do based on budget, but I also think that if we really are focused about keeping students at the center of our decision, then if there's an opportunity for us to support those that need it most and who are closest to being complete, then I think we have an obligation to do that. So if you could just maybe share with us sort of pathway for, those students that are embedded in that, that would be great.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes, let's see. Our next Community Legislative Action Team Legislative Coffee will be Saturday, March 14th at Callanan Middle School from 9 to 10:30. So hopefully, I think we have a lot of people signed up for it to attend. Hopefully they do. So thank you.
Great. Any other board members? Otherwise, I'll turn over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of notes. First, I'd like to celebrate our entire staff from K through 12. We just learned, and it's released, I think it was released today actually, finally by the department, that we have a new 4-year graduation rate high of 82.73%. Still not where, our work's not finished, but every gain that we make year over year in the face of increased challenges and fewer resources, I think is a real testament to the dedication of the staff and the board. So that's something that I think all of us should be celebrating and be very, very proud of. And in conjunction with that, a new low end dropout rate at 3.84%. So again, not the number that we want, but it's also a low from when the state started measuring this way consistently, district to district, about 10 years ago. So that's very good news. On another note, though, just a brief note on what everyone is referring to as the coronavirus. There are actually several different coronaviruses, but we're talking specifically about COVID-19. I want everyone to know there is information on our website that was posted last week that it will be updated as needed as we go through this health challenge. We are working with the Iowa Department of Public Health and Polk County Public Health to ensure we have the best information and best practices in place. We continue, as we have been doing for several years, to step up our cleaning efforts in classrooms and restroom facilities and ensure hand sanitizer is available as we go through what typically we think of as the flu season, and that has a new dimension to it this year with COVID-19. A couple of student trips that were planned for spring break to Japan, of all places, this year, and Italy, both two locations that have been stricken pretty acutely with COVID-19. Those trips have been postponed. We will continue to pursue the best and most timely information from multiple sources communicate with our community and take needed steps to protect the health of our students and our staff. A message did go out today to all of our families and to all of our staff, but I just want to note to everyone listening, the best thing that each of us can do, no matter what part of the community that we're in and how involved we are with schools, is if you are sick, do not come to school. That includes staff, students, parents, and volunteers. I'm serious. You might think it's just a light case of the, namby-pamby normal flu that you were vaccinated for. Don't count on it. Stay home. Wash your hands with soap for at least 20 seconds before eating and after touching community surfaces. In other words, surfaces that are in schools. Board table. Wash your hands when you leave here. And if soap and water are not available, use hand sanitizer. And although I don't see any at this table, it's hard to find a desk, an office desk or classroom that we don't have hand sanitizer in around the district. Refrain from touching your eyes, nose, and mouth, and anyone else's for that matter, but I think that's obvious. Cover your cough or sneezes with the inside of your elbow, not your hands, and avoid close contact with anyone who has flu-like symptoms. Whether you're sure it's not COVID-19 or not, keep as much as you can a 6 foot or greater distance for somebody who may be displaying symptoms. So we're keeping a tight eye on this. We're doing everything that we think is feasible to keep everyone safe, but it is, I'll just tell you, it's inevitable that it will get to this community eventually, I think. So we will be as prepared as it is possible to be. And we're trying to make sure that people have an appropriate level of information without causing undue panic. So stay calm, follow these best practices like we're always encouraging our children to do anyway. We need to model those, and we'll just continue to keep people apprised. So that's all I got.
All right. Thank you. And our meeting is adjourned, and our work session will begin at 7:30. Let's try that.